Dr. Renate Volpe is an expert in the field of strategic leadership and people development. She is the founder of Dr. R. Volpe Leadership Consulting, which has a vision to be a catalyst to the development of a more competent, positive, and healthier South Africa. Renate has sound experience in the world of business and academia, a renowned public speaker and author of publications such as The Entrepreneurial Mindshift and The Lessons from the School of Hard Knocks. Thank you so much for making the time, Renate.
Oh, it's always such a pleasure to be with you.
It's so great to be with you again. Can you tell me a bit about your upbringing? What were the most treasured memories of your childhood? Do you have siblings?
Dudu, that's a hot question.
Yeah.
Because so often people assume that everyone has good parents. So I sadly am from a family that wasn't a particularly happy family for the children. My parents had a happy marriage, but they should never have had children. They were post-Hitler sufferers. They lost everything during the war and came to South Africa to leave Germany behind. And, they'd been underground together. They'd escaped across the Rhine River to the American camps together. I think they were pretty messed up. So my memories are those of being alone. I was clothed well, I went to school, but the rest of the time it was up to me to raise myself. There was no emotional content. And if there was an appeal for emotions or an appeal for support or an appeal for truth, I was made to feel wrong. So, and yes, another perhaps heavy question, I did have a brother. He was a very, very bright journalist who was in the States, but he did suffer from schizotypal personality, which is where you are struggling to make contact with people on a relationship level. And eventually paranoia took over, and he hanged himself when he was 9 years older than I. So we didn't have a lot of contact because he left when I was about 16, but he came back to South Africa and killed himself in my mother's house, and I was the one to go. The pain just got too much for him.
Wow.
He just couldn't live with the pain anymore.
Yeah.
And it had to do with him accepting that my mother wasn't a good woman. Because initially he and her had almost an incestuous relationship emotionally, with me being the outsider. And then something happened in his 40s where his eyes opened and it hurt too much.
Gosh, how painful is that? Thank you for that honesty. Much appreciated. Your parents, as you say, were German immigrants. How has your belief system been influenced by their heritage? Do you speak German? I've never heard you speak German.
Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch. But, the interesting thing is that was my rebellion. I refused to speak German at some stage. So I understand it, I would say 90%. I can still read it. I would have to be in Germany for 3 months or so for it to come back.
Yeah.
But the universe is strange. It's bringing a lot of German people into my life, and then somewhere your brain finds the words and the communication.
Yeah.
So I don't really speak it, but I wish I did. It was silly of me to be such a rebel.
Well, sometimes we do
that. It was the only weapon I had.
Yes. And your belief system, is it influenced by the German heritage at all?
Very much so. I think all in all, I'm a very relaxed person and very caring person. But I was a businesswoman and I ran a big company, and I was the breadwinner for my family, so I got into autocratic mode. So it hasn't happened to me for a long time.
Yeah.
But I would get to the point of one click is enough, yeah?
Yeah.
So when I think back on that, it's quite embarrassing because in my later years I'm much more relaxed. But I did get things done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So quality is important, do it properly is important, otherwise don't bother.
Yeah. What are the hot buttons from your past? How have you managed them to develop personal honesty and personal mastery?
I think, or authority. So it has, I think as you get older, and I mean it's many years since I've left the corporate context and I've been an entrepreneur for many, many years, but there was a long stage where if a gentleman, particularly in Afrikaner with that authoritarian attitude, with a bokkiebaard, my whole insides would respond with a sort of kind of rebellion. And one day I suddenly understood that it was doing two things to me. The one is it was making me scared instead of relating as an adult, which is what I was. And the other thing is the button was making me display bad attitude. And when I took responsibility for that, I got over it. But there was a lot of fear in the authority of it. And I think I'm one of those people who's very aware of people's body language. So I'm a codependent in recovery, which means that I'm very sensitive to you and I take my lead from you. So if you frown or you show some aggravation, there's a very strong response. So I've had to train myself as an adult instead of leading from outside in, leading from inside out. And that's been part of my recovery. But I think in short, that is the trait of an abused childhood.
Interesting. I'm learning more psychology than I did in my in my 3 years of psychology. What do you think your unique value proposition is? If you are not here tomorrow, what will we miss about you?
I think people would miss my truth. My friends call me relentlessly truthful. I call a spade a something shovel. And also that is something, I think it came from anger. I struggle with the falseness of life. I struggle with the superficiality of life. I struggle with small talk. I love real talk. I love real people. So when I was younger, I think the irritation used to come out in great forthrightness that was quite rude and undiplomatic. And I think now I can tell you to take a trip and enjoy it. I've become a lot more gentle and respectful.
Yeah, I must say small talk is still difficult for me, which is why I think my relationships are so deep, because we just like, leave the weather, let's get to it. You co-founded Believe South Africa, which is a think tank with key stakeholders in the movement against gender-based violence in South Africa and stands for gender equality. Was it inspired by a personal experience with GBV, and what do you want Believe South Africa to achieve?
Okay. First of all, I'll answer what's happened to Believe South Africa. So we had a couple of wonderful gatherings of great minds with great initiatives. We functioned without control, so we shared our projects in the hope that the people who attended our get-togethers would just go and multiply them, which has happened, and then share them and form their own networks. Then we had lovely COVID, and we had a huge conference planned, which of course we tried to do it virtually. It didn't happen. But it transformed itself into a WhatsApp group of about 50 professionals that are all somehow involved in GBV, either personally, either legally, either something like Tears Foundation or FAMSA. And we have a WhatsApp group, and if there is a situation, there's no social engagement. It's just, so Dudu, I've met this young girl, this is her situation, these are the resources I'm looking for. And then some attorney will say, well, look, I'm prepared to get involved voluntarily and do pro bono work. And the other one will say, I know there's a resource here. So it's become a force. It's called The Truth About Love nowadays. And if anybody is in that field and looking for resources, they join the forum. Second question, did it come from personal experience? Sadly, yes. So if you know anything about emotionally abusive relationships and physically abusive relationships, it doesn't matter how clever you are, how adequate you are, what your credibility is in the corporate world or public world. You choose partners that somehow reflect the adequacy or inadequacy of your parenting. So I chose an emotional abuser. And I didn't, it's ridiculous because here I am with a doctorate in psychology, healing everybody else when I remained unhealed. And only when the unhappiness and the lies in my home reached such a climax that everything collapsed. He had driven me to an 18% brain function ability. I was admitted a dithering wreck to a neurological ward. I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, I couldn't eat, my jaw was stuck forward. I was put into sleep therapy, all the drugs were withdrawn, and it took me 8 months to learn to walk. And one day I walked into the doctor's office like this and I said, Professor Modi, I hope one day I can walk again. He just looked at me and he said, you did this to yourself.
Excuse me?
He was right.
Oh my gosh.
And my best friend, when she saw me, when she came up from Sedgefield, said, how could you have allowed this to happen? So the finger was pointing here. So there's nobody there when you're in that state. There's only God. So I prayed. And I found words. I found the word codependent. I found the word narcissist. I found the word sexual addiction. My husband was a sex-addicted narcissist, a covert one, which is much more dangerous than an overt one, because if you meet him, he's charming, he's relaxed, he looks like a teddy bear. People will tell me I'm so lucky to be married to a teddy bear until the door closes, then there's an animal.
Yeah.
So yes, when I recovered, I needed to unpack this because that's who I am. And the therapist said to me, don't try and unpack this, you can't. Just live. I thought, I've got to unpack this. Wow. And that was the book Senseless Sacrifice.
Yeah.
Givers and takers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the ladies in my course, Renee, one of the strategic leadership courses, I always try to get a speaker on codependency, and I could never find anyone to work with this animal of codependence that I was still trying to understand. And she came up to me after the course and she said, I'm a recovered codependent. I'd love to write a book. And I said, well, I'm busy writing one. I've got 40 chapters of women's stories, but my brain hadn't recovered sufficiently to work with it. We had coffee, and she said, would you let me take those 40 chapters you've collected from women? Because I asked women to write the truth about their lives.
Yes.
So I said, take them, because I could do nothing with them. She took them in December. She came back with a structure. And from that, and in fact, she was a narcissist. She was a codependent who, because of the abuse in her family, had become a narcissist. So for 2 years, we wrote the book. Me from the point of view of being a codependent, 40 out of 40 on the score. Her from the point of view of being a recovering narcissist.
How amazing is that?
And the truth between us was absolute. And the night before we published the book, we said, I said, if a man shoots me in the head for telling the truth about men masturbation, men's sexual fantasies, I'm ready, do it. I've done my bit.
And the book is still available?
Yes.
Yeah. Because I know I have a signed copy, but where can people get it from?
Well, it's on Amazon, it's on Kindle. I've got copies available.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Get in touch. A message, info@busoraleadershippartners.co.za, and we'll get you in touch. Yeah. Oh boy, that is like, wow. You believe that the heart is much more powerful than the head.
Well, Isn't it a continuation of what we've just been talking about?
Yeah.
I had functioned till 55 on the brilliance of my mind and the emptiness of my heart. What had to happen? I had to reconnect with my heart because I had betrayed my heart by always coping with life intellectually, rationalizing, denying, projecting, defending, compensating, suppressing, all those wonderful defense mechanisms. Yeah. Covering up my hurt, covering up my anger. So what did life do to me? It made me so depressed that I couldn't function. And remember, depression is sometimes anger turned inwards. Yeah. So that's what collapsed me internally.
Why do you think we undermine the heart so much?
Because it hurts. And if we want to be alive and we want to be truthful and we want to be transparent and we want to be spontaneous, then you are one amongst a zillion of people who are into branded goods and big cars and big houses and status and all that plastic stuff. You transcend that if you live from the heart. You don't need the stuff anymore. You just are appreciative of God giving you the life you have, the body you have, the strengths and weaknesses you have, and most importantly to own every emotion, because your emotion is a messenger. And your emotion is actually linked to your conscience. And your conscience is really linked to God.
Yeah, it's a direct
connection to God. So if you betray your emotions, you're betraying your maker.
Yeah.
So it's a messenger. We have to honor it. If it's a good message, go with it. If it's a bad message and it doesn't work for you, and you don't have the resources to respond to what's being asked, your boundary's been crossed. And remember, codependents don't have boundaries. You have to learn to assert your boundary.
Yeah. I'm going to be doing a lot of self-reflection. In your coaching practice, where you see women from top corporates, are women as liberated as they think they are? Do you still believe that it is a myth that women particularly, pull each other down?
I do see a lot of women, particularly in our strategic leadership course, which we run under Macheka Mohala and Associates.
Yeah.
Two things seem to emerge in those groups regularly. The one is that, as I did, women have to become men to survive in the career world. And part that happens in that process is they recognize that they've sold out to chauvinism, paternalism, and they've become exactly what hurt them.
Yeah.
So we work on them becoming feminine leaders. You can't get into a boxing ring with a man as a woman. He's going to beat you up. He's better at it. So you've got to find your femininity, which is empathy, compassion, intuition, the highest form of intelligence. And you've got to lead with what is natural to you. So that's one thing, the shift happens. The other thing is that women have a very hard time. Things haven't changed from the industrial relations officer at the Chamber of Mines feeling me up under the table. Today I would slap him, or offering to lay me in the lift quickly. Things haven't changed. The girls are all talking about how they are confronted with, well, darling, do me a favor and I'll see what I can do for you.
Yeah.
The one thing that I find fascinating in our groups, Dudu, is now people are openly introducing themselves as identity fluid.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if that isn't a reaction to pain.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a whole thing that someone my age kind of goes, you've got separate toilets for somebody who doesn't understand whether they're boys or girls. But it is. And we've got to understand it and work with it.
Yeah, no, the work of diversity and inclusion, it's becoming, the whole gender conversation is just like evolving.
Oh, it's such a continuum and we have to respect it.
Yeah. And I'm open to it. I'm like, you know what, I
Well,
embrace
my
things.
youngest son is gay.
Yeah.
He came out at 19 very naturally. I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
And he married a man. He was 35 recently, married a man, and we live alongside their home.
Yeah.
And they're the most wonderful couple.
Yeah. No, I'm lucky. I mean, even when I was young, people used to come out and they'll say, "Oh, ask Dudu." I'm like, why are you asking them to ask me? So my best friend is also bi, and for me it's just like natural. It's
Yeah,
not
you
even-
don't
and I
see
actually
it.
dreamt about him before he came out to me, but I waited for him to tell me. But
So you also dream about things before they
yes,
happen.
unfortunately. So that's a conversation we have with Mom. It's like, ooh, you know, will I know? Or is that going to be the time where I really don't know, you know? Anyway, what's the most daring thing you have done in your life thus far? And what was the motive for doing it?
As a family, we used to write up our bucket list.
Yeah.
And when my youngest son turned 18, his wish was to jump out of an aeroplane.
Oh dear.
So we did.
Yes.
But he got his own back. They made him really drunk the night of his 18th birthday, and he jumped out of that plane still drunk and very green.
Did you remember the experience?
We all did.
That's I don't know if I will do that. Bungee jumping and jumping out of a plane. I think about it, but I don't know if I will.
There's a little interesting story there. I practiced yoga at the time.
Yeah.
I was petrified to do this. So, you know, there's the free fall. Mm-hmm. So first of all, you've got this guy hooking up behind you. You don't know what to do, but anyway, you're going, okay, if that's part of it, fine. Then you kind of hang there, and I just went into a yoga zone.
Yeah.
And I did the free fall like this, and then when it opened, I could look.
Yeah.
And then when we landed, everybody said to me, "Wasn't the free fall fantastic?" So I said, "I missed it." But there was a lesson in that.
Yeah.
I missed the moment.
Yeah.
And I'll never do that again.
Yeah. No, I used to love roller coasters as a child.
No.
Yeah, I used to love roller coasters. So I always wonder, maybe I'll get back. I went to Victoria Falls and I was like, will I go down?
No.
I didn't. I did the helicopter instead. But maybe I'll go back for the bungee jumping. But anyway, what traits do you admire most in others that you do not have? And why do you admire that trait?
Fire. I don't have fire. I'm water. I flow. And that's why, in spite of my success in life and my abilities and my career, people have taken advantage of me. I can't say no. But in later life, part of my recovery from codependence was that the responsibility is mine. To recognize that others come from different energy and to preempt that and to manage it and not to allow it.
Yeah.
Because blaming anyone else doesn't help.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, recently I was tested on the spiral assessment again, and I'm a yellow, if that means anything, which is just quite a different person.
Yeah.
And my responsibility came up in that test as having to evoke the red in me, which is, of course, the energy and the fire. And there it is again. It's my responsibility to find the fire. Yeah. But I've always thought it was ugly.
The red.
I've always thought, people being hard and selfish and dogmatic was ugly. But sometimes that energy is necessary. Yeah. So the excuses are over. I need to find some fire.
Yeah. I would like to take the test and see how I will show up. Because, Dudu. At an interview a few years back, you mentioned that you are fascinated by people getting lost in complexity, when wisdom is really about kiss. Can you explain to our audience what you mean?
I think when people talk fancy and use big words, it's something they are working with at an intellectual level and haven't quite mastered, because KISS is keep it simple, stupid. The only way you can teach something if you are able to reduce complexity to simplicity, Because then you've mastered it, you've really understood it, whilst you're still grappling with it and you're talking conceptually in principles. You haven't mastered it.
Which is why I love strategy. And keeping it simple, stupid. I love
games
it.
and Play-Doh and all those things kinesthetically to bring the message home.
I must say, I just had quite a challenging assignment with an international board. And I think exactly that people undermine simplicity. And sometimes as adults, there are times where I get them involved in something very childlike to bring out that creativity. And I think sometimes when we are professors and we are partners in these big firms, you think that's below you. And actually, if you tap into that, I think that's where you will find things that can actually be implemented. Because this organization was also struggling with implementation. They come up with things, but they're not really implemented.
You would enjoy something that's just come to South Africa, brought by Professor Rika Viljoen, which is she started the Jungian Institute in South Africa. And all they use is basically creative modalities. You do a conscious drawing and you do an unconscious drawing, and you get the two to talk to each other, and in that way you find your own universal intelligence and your own solutions. Something you would love.
I'm sure I would. I'm going to look into that. You believe that there's a difference between a job and a career. What is the difference, and why is this distinction significant?
A job is something you've been qualified to do, you've trained to do. We need to earn money, we need to pay our way through life. That's a job. A career is where you find meaning, you find purpose, you find your flow. You know, we each have a 10% unique factor, something that I have that you don't know. And that's why we don't need to compete. So if we can find that 10% factor in ourselves and we can combine what gives us joy with our work, there are certain skills that people need to know which involve career rather than job. The first one is being strategic, so understanding the bigger picture, then branding yourself authentically. Not to fit into somebody's preconceptions, but this is who I am and it's what I can offer. Then having a great network, then negotiating for what you want or bartering, and then being politically astute, because that's what people do. They play games not to have to take responsibility. And in my research many years ago, I discovered that those were the 5 competencies that were stopping particularly women getting through the career ceiling. Once you teach women those 5 competencies, they fly.
Okay. What have you observed over the 28 years of democracy in the quality of relationships and the African and white female, particularly dynamic in South Africa, in terms of sharing the space in the corporate and entrepreneurship spaces and access to opportunities? Any behaviors that stand out for you or experiences that you've heard about?
Well, I think in that regard, my own story with Maggie Macheke is significant. And there was a TV program on her story. And she really was my intern for many years, and I gave her my company, and now she literally employs me, and she calls me Mama, and her daughter's also called Renata. So we don't lovely. See color, but we've always used our experience to show the unitedness that it can be, in spite of her having a very traditional background, me having a Western background. We go to their traditional weddings, she's part of our family. So every time we go into the corporate, we go together as one. I do think that the relationships between women there's a lot of work to do. I think it's the old diversity story. You go to a function and you see this color sitting there and that color sitting there. If they have to work together, they do. But I think there's still distance. And I think it's tragic that there is still distance. And when I work with diversity and belief systems, I always say, go and talk to the person that you're both threatened by, that you least identify with.
Yes.
Invite those people for dinner. Go out with those people, because once you sit around a table, all those preconceptions and prejudices will disappear.
Yeah.
But I think we still have a long way to go. You know, when I coach brilliant people, and I in order to kind of get them to be in touch with themselves, and I say, well, you know, who would you vote for? The belief system remains what it is because of the tradition, the superstition, the fear, the need to be loyal. So the integration really hasn't occurred sufficiently.
Yeah. I mean, part of why I do this Wisdom Personified Conversations with Dudu Msomi is exactly that, because I also appreciate that people are not seeing role models across color and across gender. So people have grown up hearing about this person and those types of people. That's all they're going to focus on. And I've been so honored having role models and mentors across gender, races, and I think I am the human being I am because of that. And I would love people to have access to that, which is part of why I do this.
When I do a talk and the audience is all black young ladies, the first thing I say is, well, what do you see? What do you perceive? What do you assume? And I then explain to them that I have no family other than my 2 sons because of the Hitler background. And that's what my family went through, but it's not mine. It's not my life. And suddenly they kind of look at me differently. And the fact that I worked from when I was 13. Yeah. I never stopped from the day I was 13. So the perceptions do not apply to me. Yeah. So get to know the individual.
That's the question, and what we're not doing, getting to know the individual. The stereotypes are still very strong.
Always one-on-one.
Yeah. What advice would you give an individual looking for a mentor?
Oh, that's a bit of a difficult one. You know, this whole thing of mentorship and coaching was a profession that evolved maybe 20 years ago. And those of us who were trained social workers or trained shrinks were very uncomfortable with it because we'd been trained and these people were given packages that they applied to people's life situations. And you kind of think, well, is it going to do the trick? But I think coaching has evolved tremendously. I think mentorship has evolved tremendously. It's a great responsibility. I think one has to split the two. Your mentor is in your organization. They can help you navigate the political scenario, but you always have to remember that your confidences are not safe with them. If you have an outside coach stroke mentor, they've sworn an oath of confidentiality. They cannot tell your stories. Their focus is you. You've got to find somebody who's done it, not somebody who is just preaching without the depth. And coaches and mentors are a dime a dozen. You outgrow them. So find what you can with person A and then move on. Yeah. If you've been matched with person A and you're not clicking, move on. Yeah. And take somebody who challenges you. For example, a lot of people are very, very clever. And it's like with therapy. They play their mentor. That's not what you want. You're not going to grow. Somebody's got to call your games. They've got to push you further. So you've got to be open. It's like going for therapy. It hurts. Yeah. It hurts. If you're going to grow, it's going to hurt.
Yeah. I must say, I launched, as you possibly know, the Busara leadership mentoring journey. And Busara is Kiswahili for wisdom. So, and it is a privilege for people to seek you. But I always find that people look at prominence. If you have a public figure or a public profile, and it's like, no, just because you have a public profile doesn't mean you necessarily have the skills or the expertise.
No, you're not necessarily a person of substance.
Yeah. So it is a journey that I try and take people through to kind of say, you yourself have to be a person of substance to realize that other people are of substance or not. But it's an interesting journey that I'm on. What is your most perfect day, and what is happening on this day?
Simplicity.
Yeah.
I have the most beautiful garden. We have my son's side of the home has a pool. It would be to have my children there with their partners. It would be to have Maggie and Renate there, and a handful of friends who've become my family, and we would all contribute, and we'd have our sun hats on, and we'd be having a picnic, a good glass of wine, and we'd be laughing, laughing at ourselves, laughing at life. That would be my most perfect day.
It's a perfect day, even when I imagine it. It's a good day. That's a good day. As we wrap up, before we wrap up, what's on your bucket list still to do?
My son, Herbie, at 35, he was a serial entrepreneur, came to me and said, I think I'm done with this entrepreneurship. Mom, teach me everything you know. So I've taken him into my business, and I'm teaching him everything I know. So it's legacy time. It's tiring, but it's an incredible privilege. So he and Maggie work together, the three of us. He started to take over some of the topics that I used to lecture, which is a relief for me and a beginning for him. And he's also on the young journey with me, with Professor Rika Fulyun. And I think he's found himself at the ripe old age of 35. He's got a long journey ahead, and I need to be at his side for the next 5 years to give him his feet and to give him the courage to do what lies ahead, which is to help one person at a time to find themselves.
Well, I'm glad that he's evolved to find what he really wants to do.
It's a privilege because he now sees me, you know, this peculiar mother. She's different. And I'm just amazed at the depth and the beauty he has. And of course, he's got 35 years of jolling behind him. So he's really done life. And he's lived by his instincts and done it rough. But that makes a different kind of beautiful person.
That will make a very good mentor for somebody as well. So in wrapping up, what wisdom would you like to enrich us with?
Feel your feelings. Ask yourself what they're telling you. First of all, honor yourself in terms of what you are capable of giving to the world, so that you don't do it with resentment. Always be respectful to others. You don't know what they've been through. Be kind, and try and find creative win-win solutions. And it doesn't always mean I win and you lose. Creative solutions can be there's one orange between us. You might want the skin for the zest, and I might want to eat the orange. If we apply ourselves with good spirit and come to the table with good intent, we can do this together.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wow. I don't have words for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, because I'm totally different from before I sat on this chair. Until next time. Thank you for making time for this episode of Wisdom Personified Conversations with Dudu Msomi. Please like and subscribe to our channel. Click on the bell notification to be informed when our next episode is available. Wisdom Personified Conversations with Dudu Msomi is also now available on Facebook Watch, Apple and Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. Enjoy the wisdom journey.